Remember, for you to have democracy, we have to look at the balance of power of the people relative to the power of the state, right? When you have oil basically coming out of the ground and the state basically having control over that, that makes it difficult for people to have leverage over their state. So it's not just the Islam thing, it's the oil thing as well, right? So it's really hard for the citizens of Saudi Arabia to be able to have leverage over their state, given two things. First of all, state makes their most of their money from oil and gas. Also, even if they diversify, a lot of it is based on foreign investment. So the average Saudi citizen, it's really hard for them to gain leverage over their own state, given that they are economically irrelevant compared to the power that the state has. So it's not this is not just an Islam. Islam obviously has a major influence, but there's also economic reasons for why democracy might be not happening in a country for a very long time.
Armin, I'd like to bring Jeffrey in on this, please.
Thank you for the
Okay.
for answering it.
Yeah, maybe I can help tighten some of the shock group here. So, why Plato saw direct democracies as dangerous in the Republic, particularly books 8 through 9, Plato classifies as democracy as a degenerate form of government, not because he viewed participation as bad. It's more because he viewed unmitigated mass rule, it collapses safeguards. For Plato, the danger wasn't the people per se, it's what happens when desire, grievance, and numerical advantage replace deliberation, responsibility, and expertise. In today's kind of operational environment, direct democracy is usually pursued by actors who believe they have the numbers and see representative republics as a hindrance. Think radical leftists who have had their numbers ballooned because of institutional capture of our universities. And it's exemplary of why Plato argued that direct democracies incentivize things like appeal to passion over reason, mobilizing majorities without accountability. Think of any crazy mobs you see in Minnesota, treating institutions as obstacles rather than stabilizers. In a representative republic, time delays exist. I'm going to put a pin in that for a minute. Filters exist, which means you have committees and debate, law and courts, and responsibility is generally traceable. Conversely, in a direct democracy, numerical strength becomes your legitimacy. The loudest or angriest faction gains disproportional power. That was the beginning of how, like, the Nazi Party started to gain political power prior to takeover. Think brown shirts. And policy becomes reactive and not strategic. In other words, Plato saw direct democracy as a precondition for tyranny, right? Democracy or direct democracy results in disorder, and that results in tyranny, not because tyranny is voted in immediately, because the system becomes so unstable that people beg for order. Here's the other issue. So when you have direct democracy, and this is actually being used by our enemies within the Red Green Alliance and the Red Black Alliance for that matter, you can actually see a direct example of this in the Muslim Brotherhood when they were involved in the Arab Nightmare, particularly in taking down a previous government in Egypt and then having the Muslim Brotherhood or the Morsi/Muslim Brotherhood interim government run Egypt and all the horrors that came after that. Hostile actors use direct democracy to lower the entrance barrier for their political hostility to national discourse, right? So direct democracy mechanisms, they reduce gatekeeping, they collapse expertise filters, they reward emotional intensity over competence, and they allow foreign or extremist actors to inject narratives very cheaply. So Plato kind of feared demagogues inside this. That was his fear. That's kind of like the 20th and 21st century version of Plato's fear of demagogues, right? Hostile actors thrive when there's complex policy is reduced to yes or no votes, emotional salience outweighs factual grounding, institutions are delegitimized as anti-democratic. Kind of like bring this finally full circle to like the founding fathers. So the founding fathers very quietly kind of agreed with Plato. They agree with a constitutional representative republic, which has indirect elections, layered veto points, and intentionally slow processes because they were worried about the very concerns that Plato underwrites in his book, The Republic. In fact, Madison's Federalist number 10 paper is essentially Plato translated into Enlightenment language. The danger is faction and the cure is large republic with filters. So direct democracies overall is not dangerous because it includes more voices. It's because it rewards raw numbers over deliberation. It lowers the cost of political sabotage. It allows hostile, ill informed, or malicious actors to hijack legitimacy. And it undermines institutional resilience. To put it another way, there's a reason why Plato referred to direct democracies as the government by appetite. In a modern world, it's a government vulnerable to weaponization, which is exactly what our adversaries, whether it's the Mullah regime, represent like Hezbollah, Putin's criminalized counterintelligence state, Chinese Communist Party, pick whatever. I mean, shake a stick, you'll hit a bad guy using it. So I get where Armin's coming from. And I can also understand why it may frustrate some people. You know, I actually had to counter a lot of leftists who were like, oh, we need to have direct democracy because we think we have the numbers after the terrorist attack of September 11. We shouldn't hit Iran. They actually argued that, Armin, in 2005. My response was real easy. Would you support direct democracy, say September 12th, 2001? And they like stop for a minute. They're like, exactly, because if we had direct democracy there, from your perspective there, Mrs. Leftist, Red Green Alliance member, we would drop 35 nuclear weapons all over the Middle East, and your little Islamic fundamentalist buddies would be all dead.
So I just want to quickly, because I want to move on to other people, I just want to quickly mention that I don't really like Plato's view on politics, because I mean he did want participation, but the participation was based on very few people who were inherently better than others, right? Like very few group of people, right? So according to, in Plato's idea world, the individual doesn't matter. You are just a gear in a machine. If your personal happiness gets in the way of the state stability, your happiness is sacrificed. And he's ruled by elite. Plato hated democracy. He believed only a tiny group of philosophers kings should have absolute power, and nobody else's opinion on politics matters, right? So it's like, yes, participation by a very, very few elite. Everybody else, soldiers, workers, they should just shut up and obey the philosopher kings. They should focus on what they're doing. He also believed in the noble lie. He argued that leaders should lie to the public to keep them in line. He wanted to tell people they were born into their social class by God, so they wouldn't try to move up the revolt. Like, you're born into your class. He believed it's inherent. Like, you cannot, like, if you were born a worker, you have to stay a worker. You never don't have a chance of becoming a philosopher or anything like that. He also believed in genetic control or eugenics. He proposed that the state should control who has sex with whom. He wanted to breed the best citizens, and suggested that the unfit babies should be disposed of to keep the population strong, which is very Nazi like. He believed in extreme censorship. He wanted to ban any art, music, or poetry that didn't promote basically state approved values. Um, and if it didn't make you a better servant, or basically if it didn't make you a better servant of the state, it was illegal. He believed in the myth of metals, so basically thinking that people were born with different capabilities. He didn't believe people could actually climb the ladder. He believes that we had people with gold souls, people who were born to lead as philosophers. They have the highest amount of reason. And then people with silver souls, born to protect like soldiers. They have courage but lack wisdom. And then we have bronze or iron souls, people who are born to work. And by the way, also people underneath that are the slaves. And remember, Plato was born in an environment that the main income was based on selling slaves. And he made his money based on selling slaves as well. And he believed that all of this was inherent. You're born with it. And people who are the philosopher kings are born philosopher kings, and they are the only ones who should be doing politics, and nobody else should have a say.
Okay, so actually, we did have Jeffrey next on the list, but I'm not sure if that was at some point that he had something to add to the conversation. Can you clarify that for me first, sir?
And Ken? So it's true that Plato had.
Come again?
Oh, I do and can. If you want it to be quicker, I can let other people go.
No, go ahead.
Up to you.
No, go
Okay,
ahead.
so Plato. I mean, your observations regarding Plato are not inaccurate. I mean, they're accurate. That said, you also have to understand he's operating within the limitations of the time that he existed. I mean, in a lot of things, he was very insightful. So when you think about things like Plato's, this is probably going to be controversial. Anyway, so if you think about like Plato's ideas on gold, silver, and bronze souls, it's very much reminds me of the genetic or biological component of the EPA's structural like framework on how you might think about the outcomes of any human endeavor. You have a genetic component, right, which is your inherent natural capabilities. You have a environmental component, which is like, Nate, this is the nurture part of nature versus nurture. It's not nature versus nurture, it's nature and nurture. And then you have a behavioral component, how you resolve the differences between the two. That's the effort and meritocracy you're talking about. I mean, as far as like, yeah, he sold slaves. I don't agree with slavery. I mean, again, he existed thousands of years ago, Armin. you know,
No,
I think
okay.
he did a pretty
Can I
good job.
respond to that?
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
he didn't. No, he didn't, because the people around him disagreed with him at his time. I mean, Athens was a democracy. He agreed with Athens' democracy. What is the name? Protagoras disagreed with him. He said like other people's opinions were valued. They were living at his time. People considered him to be like a reactionary. And the reason why he was so anti-democracy is because democracy killed his teacher. Democracy killed his teacher Socrates, right? So that's why he was being emotional about democracy, because that was he paid a huge price to democracy. But he lived in the middle of democracy. So saying like, oh, he was just a product of his time, well, his time was actually pro democracy.
He lived in a city state. Well, they called it a democracy. It's kind of more like the proto representative, well, a proto republic.
Well, yeah,
So
I
not a
understand that,
direct
but he was
democracy.
against that. Like he was against the thing that was being done at his time. So it wasn't like he was against something that was his time was not. I understand that Athens democracy is not the democracy that we want. Obviously, women didn't have the right to vote, slaves didn't have. Nobody that didn't own the land didn't have the right to vote. But I'm saying that he was against something that was being practiced at his time, not something that wasn't able to be implemented until thousands of years after.
I'm just saying that he operated within the limits of his time, right? You're talking about a guy who lived in a very primitive environment that didn't have all the advantages we have today. So, I mean, you can't, one has
I
to
mean,
be careful
he
not
was
to make
against
impress.
theater and poetry, and Athens was the center of poetry and theater. So, like, he was against
I never
that.
said he
Like,
didn't have any mistakes. I'm just talking about the impact of direct
yeah,
democracy
okay,
and why
okay,
it is that we shouldn't have it.
yeah, 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 okay. No, I'm against direct democracy as well.
Brother, I
Right.
was just trying to back you up.
Yeah.
The brotherly love is beautiful here. Okay, Oscar, you are next.
Yeah, to keep on like going on this Plato thing and this difference between the different kinds of souls, right? The bronze, the silver, and the gold. Another kind of like proto-fascistic, even kind of like Nazi-like thing about Plato is that you don't want these metals to mix, right? Because they would impurify one another. And this also goes to the idea of what's called, the idea that an outward appearance also reflects an inward moral worth. So usually the people made out of gold or the people that were touched by divine were more beautiful or were more intelligent or had some kind of divine quality that also reflected like an inward aspect of their soul, right? So Plato in a very fascistic and, kind of even like proto-Nazi way, he doesn't want these people to mix. They also have different roles based on the metals that they have on their soul, and in addition, and this is more about the people with the gold soul, which are the philosopher kings. He thinks that they should have no property, right? And that they should be completely disinterested. And I don't recall correctly, but I think he also says that they should have relationships with themselves so that they can only serve the state better. And in reality, right, these are ideal types. But in reality, people that have occupied these positions, they're not ideal types. It reminds me of the phrase of George Orwell, right? Some animals are the same, but some animals are more the same than the others or more equal than others. And it's because, Plato's wrong, right? Like, these are just human. These are not saints. These are not ideal types. These are bone and flesh human beings. And he can accept that because he's an authoritarian. and he can accept that people will be self-interested and you have to put some limitations sometimes on them. I think that that is something that he gets wrong, and like you guys said, he's responding emotionally to something that happened to his beloved teacher, which he frequently uses as a character in his dialogues. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to add to that. The only difference I would say about Plato and the modern, more like, let's say, the communist regimes, the fascists and the Nazis, is that Plato was not a populist. He was very suspicious of the people, or like the masses, the demos, whereas people like Mussolini or Hitler or Stalin were populistic, which is a different way of doing it, right? But yeah.
I just want to mention that hundreds of years before Plato, Cyrus the Great was preaching acceptance of different people with different cultures and different traditions. So, while the Greeks were basically suggesting that anybody that is not them is a barbarian and only worthy of being a slave, Cyrus the Great was freeing slaves and being tolerant and accepting of all different people who were not Persian, who were not part of his, didn't share the same ethnicity with him, didn't share the same religion with him. And that was hundreds of years before Plato.
And next, we have Eric Davis.
Oh, thank you guys. I'll make a few quick things here. For me, don't forget about the philosopher Aristotle when you're talking about democracy, because, we get into this thing where, you had the oligarchs and the aristocrats and who's, and people who are educated enough to rule themselves and stuff. There's a lot of things that come into it. My pick on the philosopher for that, that is Aristotle, but I want to move on. Thing here I noticed too here about democracy, you guys, in the news here lately too. I've been saying, back y'all kind of remember the MEK here, the MEK democracy that was trying to come to power here in Iran. And they were really they sold the Americans. I mean, they had a lot of people like John Bolton and a lot of these guys, they were all backing these guys. And they're not a democracy, really realistically, I don't know. That was kind of a deal. I just wanted to point out one thing about capitalism that I thought some professional a long, long time ago kind of explained capitalism this way, which was really special. He said you got to think of it as kind of a ratio and proportions. Now, you take a task, something that's really, really, really hard to do. Maybe one out of 100,000 people will attempt that task. One person will actually achieve it. Okay. You can take this to all kinds of levels, professional athletes. You could take it up to President Trump, one out of a couple million. The idea here is that the vast majority of people who can statistically, the people that can do the jobs don't work for the government. And capitalism works a lot simply because people see this. If you look at the telegraph in America, the government couldn't make the telegraph run. You turned it over to capitalism, and in like 20 years, they laid a cable across the Atlantic and we're transmitting across the Atlantic. See? And another thing I always love about Marx, everybody makes it out like these guys, like these communists, like the capitalists, are beating people and making them work on assembly lines and all this. Well, Marx has never been able to explain why somebody making $100,000 a year rifling barrels can't work enough hours. Yeah, I got to get to lunch before long, but I'm gonna let y'all to think about that. They make it out like
Yeah.
these jobs are bad. They're not bad. And the idea that you could be rifling barrels and in the interest of pursuing justice, you know, these guys work 80, 100 hours a week. They can't get enough of this bad job that these capitalists are whipping us for. Hey, I got to go to lunch and get back to work here, but I'm going to let y'all take over. It's good talking. I'm going to be here a few more minutes, but thank you.
Sounds good. I just want to say something quickly about capitalism, guys. The most simple way of looking at this is capitalism works because liberty works, and capitalism is just liberty in economics. That's the best way to look at it. Liberty works in politics, and liberty works in economics, and liberty in economics is capitalism. All right.
Okay, next we have Danny.
Hey, Armin, please correct me if I misunderstood your thought experiment earlier. As I understood it, you were saying that if you have two possible ways to make decisions, the first is that a couple of the wisest people in the country make decisions based on their theories, and the second is that society chooses by trying policies that the crowd wants, then keeping what works and discarding what doesn't. And you said the second option would give better outcomes every time. Did I get that right? Or is that how they
Well, instead
choose?
of every time, I would say on average, they outperform the other model significantly, because obviously you're going to have outlier situations as well. So on average, it will outperform the second model. I mean, we can see this empirically. The failure of communism shows that within the markets, within the economy, the wisdom of the crowd outperforms the elites. And the fact that democracies and the classical liberal values have worked shows that in politics, the wisdom of the crowd outperforms the elites.
Then I wanted to make 2.2 issues that are some of the exceptions. The first issue is that sometimes the people are retarded and they're retarded in a correlated way. One example is that Israel and Jordan are currently at peace, and this is a much better result for Jordanians than if they had kept being at war forever. But if you had polled the
Say,
people,
say that again,
Israel,
Jordan.
uh, yeah, we're currently at peace, and it's a good result for Jordanians. But if you had polled the people on the ground in Jordan, you would never even get a suggestion like, let's try peace with Israel as a majority result, because they're very correlated in their belief that they have to do their forever Islamic war. So you might never explore some really good options because of this effect. And the second issue is that I think a few wise people are more capable of avoiding trying things that should never be tried even once. So, a great example is anything that would overthrow the system itself, like the 1979 revolution, that should have never been tried even once.
Okay, so your examples is kind of like suggesting, like if you see if you see the mammoth dying because the humans are killing them, you could like, oh my god, they're dying, so evolution is not working because they're not evolution is not working because they're not fit to survive, right? But evolution is working, that's why they're dying, right? So if you're noticing something is failing, well, that failure is going to result in their extinction of their method. So that is the you're witnessing it working. You cannot say the wisdom of the crowd is not working because sometimes they come up with the wrong conclusion. Well, yeah, if they come up with the wrong conclusion, the consequences is going to become that they're weaker, and other people will come eat their lunch, their resources, and they will be falling behind. So you're witnessing you're in the middle of the process of the evolution happening. So saying the wisdom of the crowd outperforms, the elites because you create a Darwinian process where the poorer methods will go extinct. If you show that, means that you are going to see underperforming societies or underperforming methods, that because of the very nature of it being underperforming means that they're going to become poorer, they're going to have less resources, they're going to have less decision making ability, they're going to have less leverage on an international stage, and they're going to become irrelevant. So the fact that you can point as a failure doesn't mean that the evolution model is not working. It means that you're witnessing the process of them becoming less and less relevant, right? They're
So you're
becoming
saying that
weak. Yep.
so having a system where the decisions are made like not purely in the way that I described, like maybe you have some elected officials that make decisions, that would be part of the wisdom of the crowds.
Yeah. So first of all, like I said, we believe the wisdom of the crowd suggests that we need to have a republic model rather than we need to have limitations, not complete democracy, right? Sometimes it's just like the Shah realized, you need to have limit. You cannot just snap your finger and have democracy, because if you basically give too much freedom, the framework that you're basically doing this experiment in will break apart, right? So because the Jordanian population is not at the level for you to give enough freedom for them to have enough competition in it, that means Jordan as a society is going to fall behind compared to societies that have that ability. I understand that if you give them freedom today, the whole thing will break apart and the society will not even survive, right? But because we're in that situation, Jordan as a country will not be able to produce the same economy, the same technology, the same level of entrepreneurship, the same type of political creativeness, the same type of political competitiveness where different parties will compete with each other with the best solution. So, yeah, Jordan is forced to remain in this position right now. But because of that, it will become less and less relevant compared to societies where they could outcompeted on an economical and political, arena, in an economic arena or technological arena. It will stay behind. So if it wants to be able to become more relevant on an international stage, it needs to figure out how to slowly move to a framework where it could tap into the human resources that they have, because your human resources are your most important resources. And if you're a country where your population is so backwards that you can't even give them the freedom to choose themselves, that means that you are your highest potential, you have the lowest amount of investment in your highest potential. Your human resources of a nation is its most important resources. So you need to actually, this is what the Shah was trying to do. Iran was also not ready for democracy. That's why the Shah was obsessed with building schools, with improving the culture, so that we could get to a point where we could be democratic. So even if you're not ready for it, it's better if you slowly move to it, towards a position that you can. There was a quote by one of the founding fathers saying that a democratic society relies on the education of the citizens of that society. I don't remember what that quote was, but it was a very good quote, right? But you need to level up your individuals so that you could become a democracy, even if you're not one right now.
Okay, as a reminder, we've got a couple names left. We have about 30 more minutes with Armin,
Yeah.
and he has a hard stop, so we will be letting him go.
Okay.
If
Do I
anyone
have time
on
for one
the
more
list,
question or no?
go ahead.
Okay, so the theory of evolution relies on the fact that you get exponential growth when you have an advantage, right? So if one type of species is 51% likely to survive and the other 49%, then you take those numbers to a big power and you get that one of them is guaranteed to go extinct over time. I'm not clear how this applies to countries because I don't really see
Well,
where exponential growth would happen. So maybe you could
so
survive while being swapped them.
the competition is not between the people and the societies. The competition is between the memes. The competition is between our methods, the values, the
Mhm.
politics. So it's not a Darwinian model where some people go extinct. It's a Darwinian model where certain methods and certain values and certain methodologies will go extinct, right? And yes, they will go completely extinct once one way performs the other way. Also, one thing that I think the founding fathers miss is that it's not education that is the key, even though that's very important. I think that the economic agency of the average individual is the most important thing that a citizen of a society could have. And education plays into that, but it's not the ultimate difference maker. I think everything has to go into investing in your people so that they have higher economic agency. And education plays into that.
A reminder to everyone that when Armin leaves, we do stick around and continue the conversation. So I'd like to give you briefly what list we have remaining, and then ask that if anyone has a question specific to Armin, as opposed to just inserting your opinion on this topic, that you please make yourself known so that we make sure that we get to you. So I've got Francesco, Jilly, Jeffrey, Austin, and LF. Can you raise a hand if you have a question directly for Armin and not just an additional opinion to the topic of democracy? That is nobody. Okay, then we will do our best to get through the list. I'm going to start doing harder cutoff times. So you've got a couple of minutes. Keep it short and sweet. Francesco, you're up.
Yeah, I wanted to keep on the discussion here because it's true that generally groups are dumber than individuals, and if you take average opinions, it doesn't mean that it's better than the opinion of an expert. So if you take, for example, 5 average chess players, they cannot beat a grandmaster at it. So why it works is because the ideas compete, and you basically can find, if you have a distributed knowledge base or support, then, for example, you cannot decide the price of an apple. That computation should be distributed. If you pretend that based on a trait or basically on your opinion, you can impose that on everybody else, then probably you're wrong, and the distributed computation gets a better price for that. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say regarding to that topic. And then also I wanted to come back to Plato, gold, bronze, silver, nature, because here generally I'm gonna say something slightly controversial, but people should be judged by their appearances, because unlike books that don't choose covers, people choose their own cover. So I'm gonna avoid the punk with the mohawk with the Rottweiler next door, because the chance that I get, beaten up is higher than a mom with a stroller. And the question is about circumstance, and also have predictors. So yeah, it is true, for example, that all the drug dealers in the park in Turin where I live were black. That's a true statement. You can go there and see, but it doesn't mean that, yeah, circumstances are important. So you don't avoid black people just because the people in the park selling drugs are all black. And yeah, what you want is basically to have good predictors, because if you have predictors, you can trust people, and if you trust them, then you can basically assume they can do their job, and they also can predict you. So if you build trust, then everything runs smoothly, because you can build some common trust between people that allows for cooperation, because you don't get backstabbed at whatever step. So diversity and unity are neutral. They are not positive or negative. It really depends on context, as well as acceptance and tolerance. You need to discriminate. Discrimination is a duty. The question is based on what? And also, it's not universal. So what you discriminate should be different than what I discriminate. Coming back to the thing of before, that nobody decides the price of an apple for everybody else. So you discriminate based on what you think it's important. I do the same. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say. But judge people. Judgment and discrimination is important. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
All right.
Okay,
Let's
next
do it
is, uh-huh.
3 minutes. 3 minutes per person if we can, because I need to go soon. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, next is Jilly.
I just want to say that often when people are discussing people like Plato and Marx, there's a tendency for people to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I agree that Plato had some ideas that I didn't like. The rule of Philosopher Kings obviously was, well, not obviously, but for me was one of the ideas that I didn't like. But what he did give us was an analysis of the dangers of unmediated democracy through unmediated mob rule. And on the basis of that, modern democracies have built a whole set of things to guide, to remedy that risk. And that includes things like separation of powers and different voting systems that will create slightly different results on different levels of government. I wanted to also say that Marx falls into the same category. There's a lot about Marx I don't like. Communism and socialism inevitably lead to an authoritarian, even brutal governance, because command economies must have control of all the economic resources, and humans are one of the economic resources. And that's why such brutal control almost always flows out of that philosophy. But Marx had some good points too. And one of his good points was, for example, that he made quite an interesting and valid analysis of capitalism itself. And that allows us to have a deep look at capitalism and understand the ways in which it works. I just want to say that this black and white, and I don't think Armin or Jeffrey look at things in a black and white way. But when I was listening to that argument, I was thinking, well, yeah, I get what Jeffrey's saying, and I also get what Armin's saying. They have good and they have bad. And it's the same with Marx. And it's really important, in my opinion, to recognize the good and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's my
Oh,
point. But if you want to comment on it, I'd love to hear it.
No, I completely agree. I didn't say I hate everything about Plato. There are things about Plato I like. And also, even though I'm very anti-communism, I agree with Marx on the fact that he's a material determinist. Like that's one thing I agree with Marx, material determinism. But also I believe Marx was just didn't have the proper data. Like I think he was a very smart person that if he had the proper data, he would have come to a different conclusion. Like if you read his stuff, it's obvious that he was like, you know, I don't know. I think that he right now it's easier for us to judge him because we have the empirical data to show that what he said doesn't work. But he didn't have that empirical data at his time, so he caused millions and millions of people to die from starvation, sure, but again, he didn't have the proper data. It's we have the luxury of empiricism right now.
Okay, Jeffrey, I've got you down, but I don't know if you wanted to be on the list or you were chiming in at a different time. Please let me know.
You can chime in.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I kind of disagree with the idea of Marx. I mean, Marx was kind of a vile, evil douche canoe who lived on his daddy's dime, was like a lazy guy who his dad funded his way through college, and even his father, kids, wife, and his main colleague Engels refer to him as a man possessed by thousands of demons. And Marx. I mean, as far as materialistic determinism or the like a materialist idea approach towards the world, I mean, that's true. It's not that Marx discovered it, it's that he co opted, warped, and weaponized it. As far as Plato's concerned, Plato wasn't a proto Nazi. In the book Republics, 2 through 4, it says exactly what I said, which is Plato repeatedly emphasized physis, which is nature, alongside, I can't pronounce it, education. So what he's saying is there's an inherent component in biological substrates. There's a biological substrate to aptitude. That said, it was individual in nature. It's non-ethnic, non-hereditary in a strict sense. When he talks about gold parents giving birth to bronze children and bronze parents giving birth to gold children, that's completely incompatible with the racial biology that say Nazi Germany push, which is stable grouped inheritance, bloodline purity, and collective traits. So, I mean, as far as like, I get where your criticism might be, Armin, given some of the things you say. Maybe I'm misunderstanding you. Underestimating corruption among the rulers, treating kind of social harmony as more important than individual liberty. Myth is a political tool. Really, the discussion when you talk about the myth of the metals kind of boils down to this, at least to my experience in the modern parlance. Are all differences between people purely social constructs, or do natural differences exist that society must account for? And Plato says differences exist. Modern racial egalitarians or pseudo racial egalitarians read left wing douche canoes. They say differences must not be acknowledged. Labeling Plato a Nazi then is a way to forbid the question itself. As far as total laissez faire free market approaches towards consensus building, you're not wrong, Armin, and I very much am heavy free market. Here's the challenge, though. This is what the Shaw understood. At least maybe I can help, you know, tighten that shot group, at least to the best that I can do or see. It's not that free markets or a free market system doesn't ultimately find equilibrium. It does. The issue is the instability in transition and what defines the new point of equilibrium. The Shah understood that, like, His Highness Prince, I don't know if I should call him king or not. I defer to you. Prince Reza Pahlavi is understands that as an operationalize that and what he wants to do with regards to being a figure point for the resistance and a steward regarding the transition, yet allowing then Iran, once this transition's done, you have stability for general Iranians to rightfully pick their own government. The same with his father. He knew he was trying to be the steward between Iran and its kind of feudalist esque system in the beginning of his stewardship up until his fall, so that Iran could become a modern, would achieve tolerant modernity. So I just there's some things there's some nuances that help us kind of like apply, I would contend would help apply those ideas, much to the betterment of brave Iranian protesters, Iranian people, or indeed my own country for that matter.
But I mean, I didn't know those personal things about Marx, so now I hate him too. Thank you.
Oh, I
I mean,
wasn't
I
trying to
always
be
hated
mean.
him.
It wasn't you, brother. I was just a lot of people that like Marx. Remember, Marx wasn't real quick. Marx wasn't an atheist because I know that you did the Atheist Republic. He was a militant anti-theist.
I know, I know,
Marx
I know. I mean,
believed in God.
but
He
let me just
hated
be clear.
people.
I always hated him for killing millions of people, but I didn't know personally he was also a douchebag. Just one thing I forgot to mention regarding what Jilly said. I completely agree that communism has to lead to fascism. There is no way where you could control people's property to this degree without also
Everything
controlling
leads to
politics to the point.
fascism.
No, not everything leads to fascism. No, no, not everything leads to fascism. Democracy doesn't lead to fascism. A proper republic doesn't lead to fascism. Proper individual rights,
People are
it
inherently
doesn't lead
fascist,
to
so
fascism.
everything will lead to fascism.
No, they're not. People are not inherently fascist. People are actually. Let me just say this: people are actually inherently desire to be free. People inherently desire to love each other, to work with each other. People don't inherently desire to rule over each other. People desire to love each other, and people desire to respect each other's freedom. We're social animals, and that means that we actually enjoy seeing other people prosper. We enjoy seeing other people happy. We don't want to control people. We want to actually be the instruments for them to achieve their goals. We are social. We're the
People
most
enjoy
social
both.
animals
People
out there.
enjoy seeing people happy and getting to also see other people miserable. People want both.
So that you just contradicted yourself. Then, if people want both, then they're not inherently fascist because that makes it more complicated. Anyways, just
Okay.
Samantha, like I'm not going to keep going back and forth with you, but saying everything is fascist is a very simplistic way of analyzing the world. It's like like basically black and white. This black and white thinking doesn't serve us. Okay, not everything is fascist. Okay, but communism leads to fascism. Not everything leads to fascism. Go on, BT.
Okay, and one more time, we've got Austin, LF, and Dijal. Does anyone on this list have a separate question important to Armin, not having to do with communism, fascism, or democracy?
Or Iran as well, if you guys want to talk about, or the middle geopolitics right now in the Middle East.
Okay, they want to keep on with the topic. So next we have Austin, and reminder, 15 minutes hard stop. So I will interrupt at 3 minutes if you're not keeping your own time, just to make sure we stay on track. Austin, go ahead.
Beautiful atheist republic. In my life, I was just so upheavaled with life, and I needed to get grounded and feel good about life and tap into self help as I became a legally aged adult. And when I learned of like, I know this is going to sound terrible in the atheist group, I'm sorry, everybody, but when I learned I was associated with the 18th tarot card, and one of the words are doubt, that opened the floodgates toward doubt and skepticism. And so I think solidly I love agnosia. I have become someone who cannot trust anything. I think that might have to do with my mother instilling, oh, don't trust that person. Learning to not be able to trust my own parents, and to fulfill the needs and to get in touch with my own needs. The outside world is esoteric to me. So I just walk humbly to try to see what will open the veil so I can. I don't know if the positive feedback I get is in my own delusion or the outside world. I don't think I can ever figure that out entirely. Or the negative things that I receive through my faculties. That it is a delusion, that it's because of something greater, but I have applied my mind toward philosophies that to get the brain going, to get the happiness going. And strangely, I don't know if it's because my chemicals are being released, but it seems that I am in touch with the environment and there's much ignorance to the environment. And maybe I am arrogant of saying that I think there's utter ignorance because I find out, I think the world is has attempted to be explained, and I just don't think we are using enough variables. I'm obsessed with variables and all the different subjects. The sciences are not, I mean, the sciences we have can become harder sciences, essentially. Anthropology, psychology, neurology, there's more in depth things to study. I think there is something about this religious endeavor that can become codified, and people have attempted to codify it. And they have run into trouble in the past, interestingly, with superstitious institutions which try to enforce a fascistic religious capability. I would apply that also toward economic model and
So, Asen, can I say something? Can
sure.
I interrupt you for a second? So,
Yes.
here's what I think is happening, and let me know if this is accurate. I think you're trying to figure out too many things at the same time, and you're getting basically dizzy in the middle of all.
OMG, come on. Don't put me down like that. I love it. I'm happy
No,
about it. And
no, no, no. I'm not putting you down. It's actually fascinating, right? I think like you are basically carrying a very heavy weight, right? And
but
it's a
it
really
feels good. I feel parts of me feel terrible, and I want to address that. I This rigorous honesty of who am I, how do I feel, what do I see in
right.
the world. Maybe I'm propagandized. I think I'm a damn Manchurian
No,
candidate
I
in some
think
aspect.
I think you need to simplify things. I think you need to unload a lot of the weight that you're carrying and just focus on one thing at a time instead of trying to figure out make sense of the whole world, right?
That's
And
for me. That's not fun. And
well, no,
important
you
to
could
me
add
is
to it.
fun.
You could then add to it once you figure out something,
I
then you
think
could add to
your
it.
process of even attempting to lead someone is potentially fascistic or dominant. And it's a bit of a rebuttal because this ignorance toward everything, I apply it. I would apply it toward. What do you mean? After I spoke for a little bit, I gave you my confession. I've heard this from people, and I'm going, what what expertise do you have on my life? I was with a therapist yesterday, and she said, I come from the approach that you're the expert
Okay.
on your own life, that you had your experiences, your life. Expert and experience are pretty similar words. So
Okay.
I just say that
Well,
because I feel like you cut me off. You're like, and I'm like, no, what do you mean, dude? I'm here.
well, Well, yeah, I seriously think that you're doing too much at the same time, and that's going to produce not the results that you're expecting. I think that the best way to go about things is to simplify it. To me, I think the best first step to accept as like if you're trying to make sense of the world, the first few steps is like, well, it seems like there's something exists. It seems that there's an
I
observer.
walk in theory. This whole thing of
Hold
God
on, let me
or
tell
life as
you.
mystery, because I see
Okay, okay. I said,
people.
all right,
Yeah.
Austin, we need to move to other people. So close your mic. I just want to say this and then we'll move to other people. Okay, so close your mic. Yes. I'm going to be fascistic towards you because there are other people waiting. Even if you're not going to take my advice, I'm going to just say this to other people. I see this all the time. People basically just trying to, like, they become radical skeptics because they attempt to make sense of everything all the time. And that failure makes them think that radical skepticism is the right solution. But if you choose something, if you take a bite bigger than you can chew, then you're not going to be able to swallow. Then you're going to be skeptical towards everything. You need to take smaller bites, and smaller bites could be very, very small. And then once you go through the process of trying to make sense of smaller things, then you're going to become more confident because you could see that you actually made sense of this. Now you made sense of the next thing, and then you're going to become confident in the process because you can actually see that things are starting to make sense to you. The first step is noticing that something does exist, and then I'm observing it, and I seem to want to be happy. And then I realized that the best obvious way to be happy is to be useful. And that was the base of everything. And then everything else was being built upon that. These are the truths that nothing else philosophically has to make sense. As long as this makes sense, everything else could be built on top of this. Something exists. It seems like I'm observing it, and there are other seemingly conscious entities that seem to exist, and it seems that if I make myself useful to them, I experience the highest amount of happiness. Everything else, as long as this is verified, everything else could come later after that.
Beautiful advice. Thank you, Armin. Next, we have Dijal and then Miss LF.
reality is an interesting subject all unto itself. Maybe we should talk about simulation theory at some point and get into the weeds about that. I'm not a believer in it myself, but I do think it's very interesting. Maybe that's something we should talk about sometime. Hey, Armin, we were talking about Cyrus, the greatness he achieved, and how he was an innovator in his own time, where he, opposed slavery, believed, exalted tolerance, believed in codified rights and such. And you're completely right about that. More specifically, we've got the Cyrus cylinder. I've heard you talk about how the founding fathers were actually influenced by that. If you could go a bit further into that, I'd really appreciate it. Something we should also talk about more in depth sometime as well.
Yeah, I read this many years ago, so I'm not going to have the details on the top of my head, but I remember specifically saying founding fathers referring to him in their writings and being inspired by him when it comes to a model for tolerance and acceptance of different people within your society, and basically, which is basically the foundations for liberty, right? Yeah, exactly. So I have to go dig that up if I have to look it up. So I don't remember the exact points that the founding fathers made when they were referring to Cyrus, but because I read this many years ago.
Sure. Yeah, it's just something I thought should dig into in a future day, because I think that would be fascinating, because he was a very visionary figure, and I think he did have a lot of influence on Western civilization.